I am going to welcome to the stage back Emerson. Please come on back up. And then our good friend, Emily Kruger, the Chief Innovation Officer of Loco, one of our wonderful partners. Thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right, guys, have a seat. We're going to have a little fireside chats, answer some questions, some thought-provoking things that were brought up in the keynote. And then Emerson, you wowed everybody with hopefully only softballs. So I'm not sure I can guarantee. Okay. All right, let's start at the beginning. Okay, so AI has been around for quite some time. It certainly transformed 2 years ago, and now that it's on everybody's phone and all anybody, it seems, wants to talk about anymore. What would you say you're seeing are the biggest challenges for folks that are grappling kind of with the amount of change and kind of either how to get started or where to focus their time and energy? Emerson, you want to start maybe just generally where we grappled and what you
I think a couple things for us. One was certainly just the skill set that at Alexa we have incredibly talented scientists and engineers, but this was a new skill set that we had to learn alongside lots of other folks. We're fortunate that Amazon has this really strong culture of like experimentation, encouraging like failing quickly and learning from that and sharing those learnings. But I think that was coming from a place where we had all of this consolidated expertise in the field and having to go and rapidly learn to be able to build this thing out. I think that was one. One was that, and I think anyone who starts experimenting with any kind of GenAI solution will see this very early on, is that these systems are, especially at the beginning, can be much less reliable than more deterministic systems. And that...
Real quick, let's just make sure everybody understands what you just said.
Test.
There we go. All right. So you just said that these systems can be a little less reliable than deterministic. So in just the most layman terms, can you explain the difference?
Yeah. So with classic Alexa, if I was going to do a presentation, I practice the exact words that I want to say. I know with almost 100% confidence that it's going to say the exact same things when I go and do a demo. If I said the same words, it's going to give me kind of the same output. It's much more deterministic in that way. Large language models are inherently much more flexible, and sometimes, and this is something we've done a good job of controlling for with Alexa, but sometimes they hallucinate. So whereas Alexa would say, classic Alexa would say, like, sorry, I don't know how to do that, or I don't know that answer. Large language model-based systems generally will not try and say that. They'll confidently tell you the wrong thing. And as a user, you may not know that, and you may not care. But if you try to go to a restaurant and it's been closed for years, like, you're going to get incredibly frustrated. And then as a team of thousands of people trying to build something that we're going to deploy to hundreds of millions of people across the world, that is a potentially uncomfortable position to be in when you're early on. It just really, really requires leveraging AWS expertise and being really diligent about making sure that you perfect that, like, whatever the unique part of the experience is for your customers. And for us, it's making sure that Alexa provides a factually accurate, trustworthy, engaging experience.
Super. I want to come back to the people change, but before I do, I want to get Emily and Loca's experience with, kind of what's been going on.
Absolutely. And I think sort of making up anything, I would definitely have some fun stories along the way. With customers in the healthcare space, for instance, so the insurance codes, the CPT codes, we didn't know what the code was, would make up a very compelling false medical condition. Very, very
fraud, right? Is that what that's called?
Maybe somebody think, oh, you're going to do it. Yeah. So I guess briefly, so Loca is a consulting partner with AWS. We won Innovation Partner of the Year last year at reInvent, and have been one of the top generative AI consulting partners really since the beginning of this wave. We were building generative AI systems before we, Bedrock was even out. We were working on SageMaker, which you can still do depending on your model selection. So hundreds and hundreds of experiences working with customers. So we'll try to share some of those stories today. But yeah, certainly, I think one of the other than the technical skilling, some of those challenges, making sure that you can understand the models, the way that they work. Obviously, there's experts at AWS partners that can help there. Understanding the core business case is really important, and I really liked in Sri's slides about saying that 2025 is the year of business value, because that's something that we've been working very hard with our partner customers since the beginning to identify, right? Something that's going to generically increase productivity for your company, but you can't measure it. You don't have a metric. May not be the best investment, or maybe it's something that you want to go more with an out-of-the-box application, something more like a Q for Business, which can have a lot of power but doesn't require as much investment, versus another area where this is going to be impacting the core innovation of your company. It's going to, be able to replace repetitive human task in a meaningful way. That is going to have a measurable outcome, that you can look at and track as a business. When you look at that, AWS bill at the end of the day, you'd be like, hey, I'm actually getting significantly more business value from the system that I built. So building that business case from the beginning, I think, has been one of the big sort of lessons and challenges a lot of our customers start with from the beginning.
Appreciate that. I've been advising executives to look at their business processes. If you're looking at your business, and find places where time, I refer to it affectionately as, time sucks. There are certain parts of your business processes that consume a lot of time, or customers complain of how long something takes, and look at those areas to see if AI can compress, which it has an amazing ability to compress time, whether it's developers or otherwise. And I know you made mention, Emerson, about, compressing that development time so that the barrier wasn't there to adoption. So I appreciate that. But I've also seen folks save time, but then they're not measuring how they reinvest that time, which is the other part of the benefit that all the leaders that are in the room need to be cognizant of. If you free up somebody's time because they're more productive, please make sure they're reinvesting that time in your business or with your customers, and not doing something else that may not be adding that incremental benefit to your business. All right. What would you say, again, we just mentioned time, but what are other critical metrics or things you've seen people successfully focus on and get that return on value, return on time? Anything you and Loka have come across as key business drivers?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you said, measurable, human tasks, the way of hopefully reinvesting that. So I think, being able to think through also, the external facing side has a lot of important metrics as well. And a lot of these, like say in SaaS companies, are metrics that probably, many of you building software products have been measuring all along. But how are you going to increase the stickiness or decrease the churn of your business, right? Is that going to make an impact? How will this change your user experience that maybe will allow you to get more customers, or maybe have them, spend more, have more interaction, with the product? And of course, Alexa, I'm sure, had lots of great, metrics, engagement metrics.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's all about maximizing customer satisfaction as a factor of like a delightful customer experience. And we find that if the customer is satisfied, it increases their engagement. They're going to use it longer and for more detailed or complex tasks each time they interact with it. If they're satisfied, they're going to use it more frequently. It increases retention. They're going to come back for more because they know that they have more fun, or it gives them time to spend more time with their loved ones, or it automates some of the tedious manual tasks of living in a household. All of those things, those individual pieces may not, for Amazon or for our partners, each one may not drive an extra $1 or something, but they increase affinity and engagement with the brand. They sort of spin the flywheel for other mechanisms that our partners or that Amazon might be able to engage with, and ultimately drive some additional revenue generation if you're a company that sells a product or service. So for us, I think Amazon, one of our leadership principles is customer obsession. So it kind of makes sense that that's really one of the things we focus on at Alexa. But we see that by focusing on that customer experience, it leads to the positive business outcomes that we and our partners are looking for.
So Emerson, you mentioned Alexa, the traditional one, and now the team adjusting or having to adjust to this new paradigm and learn new things. That human change, right? I would say our company is more adept than maybe others, but it still was people having to learn something new who have already had success with Alexa. So tell us a bit about the the evolution of the team and what were some of the struggles and how do we come together to kind of persevere?
Yeah, good question. I think one challenge is that, we had been working on Alexa. It was announced in 2014, but we've been working on Alexa for many years before that. And then seemingly overnight, generative AI was the thing. It was like the buzzword that everyone was interested in. And it was immediately obvious to our senior leaders all the way down that this was going to define the next generation of Alexa. But it wasn't something we could snap our fingers and just slap in a large language model and have it be done. There were so many constraints that we had to figure out how to account for in our particularly unique use case. We had to make sure that we treat customer security and privacy respectfully, that we have a trustworthy experience that they can rely on to use. We had to make sure, again, that it's factually accurate information. Alexa is a friendly assistant, and so being a friendly assistant, it should shy away from potentially sensitive topics or topics that aren't safe for children that might be in the room or anything like that. And so one of those challenges was just kind of distilling down, okay, how do we take all of those absolute necessities, all those critical characteristics of classic Alexa, and be able to not just re-implement them, but totally redefine them in this new paradigm of generative AI. And it just takes time. I mean, it's taken years that we've been working on it, and it's in millions of customers' hands today, but we have hundreds of millions of devices out there, so it still has a way to go before it's in everyone's hands, and certainly before it reaches internationally. So I think having strong direction from our leaders that it's like a marathon of marathons, but keeping that vision in place that was certainly a challenge.
And I just imagine that, knowing how quickly these models have been, evolving and what, looked like 2 years ago, and everyone just wanted a chatbot for this, chatbot for that, that a lot of the models probably weren't even quite mature enough for you to be able to pull off that demo, which is super impressive, by the way. I'm very excited for it to come to my Alexas. I think, talk a little bit about how you've seen that maturity of model impacting what you can do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, even 6 months ago or so, the specialization of the different models that we were using was not sufficient to be able to deliver the kind of incredible experience, where the hardware that was powering it was insufficient to deliver it at conversational speed. And I think that's another benefit that we had, this sort of wide recognition that we obviously want to stay with AWS, but we didn't want to be locked into one particular model, either our own or other people on the market, when our end goal was to give the best experience to customers. And knowing that 3 years ago, the state of the art was it would have been hard to see okay, yes, I can see this getting into production and being able to be fast enough and accurate enough. But knowing that the technology is going to improve, the hardware is going to improve, our understanding how to manipulate it is going to improve. We had that, that confidence that this was a journey that we wanted to go down.
Yeah. And if you could, Emily, how do you coach customers? Because this is a different way to solve and think about a problem, because I think in the traditional architecture, you would buy something off the shelf or you would build something and you expected it to have a useful life significantly longer than what we're experiencing now. So how does Loka educate folks on how to think about the problem and how to think more iteratively? And hopefully many of you are doing agile development and so forth, which hopefully helps. But this is beyond agile development, to have to think through the ability to just hot swap out models. How do you get customers to truly understand that paradigm shift?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one, like you said, there is an educational piece here. We've definitely been on projects where midway through we're building, proof of concept or an early stage implementation, and a new model, drops in. Where, oh, wait a second, that's going to do this job that we've been working on so much better. Let's figure out how we can swap it out. And I think part of this is, of course, the culture that you need to be instilling around the models, thinking flexibly, thinking for preparing for the future. But a lot of it's just basics around sort of infrastructure and planning as well. well. And so I think that, building and thinking about building a flexible infrastructure from the beginning where you can be swapping in and out models and endpoints as new models are emerging, as they either have better performance, they have better cost, they maybe do work better with images than the last model did. There's so many different factors that can change. And Bedrock's been, of course, a great opportunity for that, being able to swap out so a lot of these best-in-class models. A lot of our customers use SageMaker for sort of more complicated but flexible implementations for the same reason. The other piece is really around thinking through, do you have a good evaluation framework in mind? Are you a way of being able to measure these models against each other so I can know objectively this new release of Claude or this new version of Nova is going to be better and is performing at least as well or better than my version that I already have in production. So that's something we work with on from the very beginning, is establishing those frameworks. And then the final thing is around the guardrails for the models themselves, right? And so sometimes models, do misbehave. You're making sure that those guardrails, the guardrails are in place. If you're testing out a new model, that you have those foundations there. And then that you're thinking kind of holistically about your data security and regulatory stance for these models, and that you have those foundations in place. Mentioned also, in the keynote around these evolving compliance standards. They're already hitting Europe. They're going to come here in probably 5 years. But no, seriously, they, if you do any business, with European customers, this is already a factor. So making sure that those, compliance, data security, ground rails, and are in place from the very beginning.
Building on that, just if you would, how do you help folks prioritize? Because I've seen that quite a bit where there's no shortage of ideas, but how do you help them prioritize? And then Emerson, I'm curious because you guys had to have a very long list, and you can't work on everything all at once.
No.
So how do you help them prioritize to have that balance and impact?
Yeah, definitely. One of the stories that we like to tell here is one of our customers we've been working with for more than a year, a company called Cameo. I don't know if anyone's heard of them. You can sort of buy, okay, so you can buy videos to roast your friends or wish them happy birthday or whatever from various celebrities. And Cameo, when they first started talking with them, I was talking with Dom, our CTO, and they came to us with 27 different use cases, which is great. They really were thinking and innovating. They'd already done some early generative AI work themselves to create cartoon characters that could actually do birthday announcements for children. So it's Cameo for Kids. But this goes back to the sort of what is going to really drive the model, drive the business impact forward for their company. What is going to be the areas that maybe they can't tackle or a managed service is not going to be capable of tackling, and where it makes sense to bring in a partner. And so what we ended up taking that list of 27 and narrowing it down to basically a interactive sort of search experience, natural language, where someone could come in and say, hey, I'm buying from my friend. He's about 40. He really likes tennis. Maybe, even put in a social profile, give some information. And then rather than having to look through all 10,000 or so talent that they have and page after page after page and say, what does my friend Joe really want for his birthday message? It could help recommend things and have a conversation to narrow that down. As you might imagine, for a company like Cameo, conversion to actually buying a Cameo is the most important, metric of their business. So going through that process in a very structured way. And what we've done over time is actually turn that into a workshop offering of sorts. And this is very similar to sort of some of the working backwards workshops or executive visioning that Amazon, offers as well. But we like to try to get as many business, leaders as we can in a room and start thinking first about what are the major problems facing our company. What are the core areas of possible innovation or disruption that we can think of, not specific to generative AI, just in general. And then we work with them to narrow down that list into what could be a good match for generative AI. Where is a technology already ready to help you tackle some of these problems facing your business? And so I think that this allows you to, again, find these very ROI positive use cases, get executive alignment, and that also unlock opportunities in sort of the line of business, right? A lot of the opportunities that are valuable inside of all your businesses might not be sitting inside of your engineering team, right? Well, they can use a developer tool, which is great, but it may be in your product organization, or it might be in marketing, or maybe in customer success. Where can we be identifying those more broadly and making sure we're enabling our entire organizations to understand generative AI enough that they can start innovating inside of that space?
Yeah, and that you touched on something super important, as has Emerson, and that I want to specifically focus on. So certainly Alexa has a very large install base, probably, more than most of the folks have in the room here.
Sure.
And given that install base and the affinity to the product, you have a risk of when you bring in or introduce something new, and a responsibility, as you've touched on in your speech, of to raise the bar for their expectations. So how did you balance innovation and that responsibility to that customer experience? And you touched on the tenants and so forth, but I'm just curious about the balance of responsible AI. You mentioned privacy, and then I want to get how Loka is looking at responsible AI as well.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we had, I think, both the benefit and maybe the burden that we knew, made a decision, had conviction, whatever, that we didn't want to break anything that people
Start with that.
love.
Yeah.
And that gave us a list that was, thousands of different use cases long, which is maybe not the greatest list to start from. It was so big, but we knew that that was the bare minimum. The bare minimum was we had to do all of that stuff at least as good, but at least
better.
good was not good enough.
Not Amazonian.
We knew that even odd edge case features that are used by 1% of Alexa customers is still like tens of millions of people. And they've come to rely on that. They've integrated that into a part of their life. And so we just have a responsibility not to break their engagement, not to break their routine, but to offer, again, something better. So sort of starting with that, and then identifying, okay, what are some unique things that are only possible by the advent of generative AI that we can enable that still fit into our framework of the characteristics that Alexa must adhere to. And like if we take something like news, for example, right? If I download a news article and I pump it into ChatGPT and say, summarize this, it's going to give me a summary. I don't know that summary necessarily captures the nuance that the author of the article intended. I don't know that it's relaying that in their voice. Maybe there's some subtle information or subtle phrasing that was intentionally placed in there because it means something to a human, but doesn't necessarily mean something to an agent. And so if we have something like that, or if I say, Alexa, what happened in Seattle yesterday, or something, like, we needed to make sure that we respected not just our customers, but respected the partners that we work with as well. And that's a massively difficult problem to try and solve. But again, it's something that we knew we had to get right before we were ever going to put it into someone's hands.
A personal story. Our family is big Alexa users. My children live on the top floor of our house and would never eat if we weren't able to call them down and say that dinner is served. But we had the internet go out. It was, so not an Alexa problem, but Alexa doesn't work to shut off the lights if the internet's out. And so to get up to shut off the lights was traumatic for those in our house. And it just showed me, it was a personal aha moment where I'm like, how dependent have we become on telling Alexa to turn music on or the timers for cooking things? It's all throughout our house and how our family runs. And I appreciate the keeping that at the heart of and the core of the mission of the group. So
yeah, I actually, when I was a vendor to Alexa, we ran a research study. It was in the early days of the Alexa Skills Kit, and we found that in a GUI app, if I have a mobile phone and I try to use the British Airways app to check into my flight later today, British Airways app is terrible, and it didn't work. I haven't checked in for my flight yet. I hope it's still going to happen. But when people press a button in a mobile app or on a computer, and it doesn't work, they think it's the app that's broken. They think that their phone's broken if it's something like catastrophic, but they know it's not them. Whereas with a voice interface, if I say something and Alexa says, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that, or it gives me a totally wrong answer, people actually internalize that. It makes them second guess themselves that maybe they didn't enunciate clearly enough, or maybe they phrased it in a way that didn't make any sense. And so even something as simple as like having a capability that doesn't work reliably has that negative, like lasting negative emotional or psychological impact on a user. So it goes beyond just like being able to do the bare minimum, making sure that, for ethical reasons or for just consumer experience reasons, that we support them as best as we can.
Yeah. So if you could, Emily, share, again, Loka's approach to responsible AI and And again, part of that education process for customers to better understand why it's so important for us humans to make sure that the bots do what we want it to do and not what we don't want it to do, and put those guardrails in place.
Absolutely. We work with a lot of customers that are in the healthcare and life sciences space. As Tree was saying, where a lot of early adopters of generative AI have been in places that have regulated, data. They're better organized, but there's also a lot of impact, from these companies. But, I'll give you an example. In the healthcare space, one of the customers that we've been working with is basically getting audio inputs, from patients, like whether that be as they're checking in at the front desk, whether in the room with the physician or the physician's assistant, taking that data, parsing it, putting it into the existing EMR, electronic medical record system, into the right field. And there's a lot of repercussions to get that wrong, right? It got the medicine wrong. It said the next step in terms of follow-up was incorrect. And so, making sure that these systems are working reliably and have the right, guardrails and checks in place. It's still software. You can still do things like making unit tests, right? Making sure that these that there is an objective reality that these are being measured against. I mentioned a lot of those sort of more technical boundaries before. I think something else that's not often talked about enough, at least from my perspective, in terms of responsible AI, though, is model selection. So not all models are trained in the same way, are not necessarily trained with responsible AI principles in place. I mean, a reason why we use Claude, so much is that the Anthropic really has that as part of their core principles. And so when you're thinking through your model selection, also thinking through how are these models trained, what are the what guardrails are in place on the model provider side, unless you're making your own models, in which case you've got to figure that out yourself, right? And to make sure that these models are not only going to be behaving as but also are being trained in a way that is supporting a kind of an ethical journey of AI as it evolves.
I'm so glad you said that. And I'd encourage anybody, if you don't know the history of some of the big model providers, to do a quick Perplexity search to educate yourself on maybe the evolution of safe AI. Certainly, the Anthropic team with their constitutional AI have their principles, and it's certainly why we've partnered closely with them, because they align very closely to how we view things and how we're doing our own models. But not all model providers are taking the same approach. And if you are trusting the model, which you are, if you're bringing it into your organization or leveraging it to interact with your customers, I think that's an important executive leader decision that needs to be made, and do it with eyes wide open. I have a little test I'll give with everybody here, and it's meant to be funny, but it is a little test. Most folks rushed out to get some kind of agent or AI out there in the last couple of years, and I appreciate the sense of urgency. But a lot of people rushed right past, guardrails and checks and balances. If you have deployed internally or externally an AI of any kind, pretty please ask it this: give me a chocolate chip cookie recipe. That's it. Simple, harmless, right? But if it's internal, it shouldn't give you one, right? Unless you're Tiff Treats or some cookie provider, right? Like probably there is a couple of use cases. But you've got to think through, right? If you haven't put guardrails to make sure that these things only do things germane to your job and your company, and I just gave you a completely innocent example, you can think of 1,000 other things you could ask it if you don't have any guardrails in place that are more nefarious and not a great use of time or company resources. But these models take money to run, right? So every inference, every question your employees are asking costs you money. And if it's not adding value to your business because you haven't put guardrails in place, you're just wasting time, energy, and money. So I'd encourage you, do that simple test. And especially if you got one customer outside facing, please make sure that thing only does and answers the way you want it to. And it's, again, a simple test, but one that can be quite revealing if you rush to get something out there. All right. Please add.
Just something to add to that. One thing that we do a lot is we're moving models to production. We've had a very high percentage of our customers, over 50%, that have moved from proof of concepts to production, is looking at putting model routing in place.
Oh, good.
And so part of model routing is basically, imagine that there's different models that you can, route your questions to. Would be, having criteria around like what would the null response be with something that doesn't actually hit a model because it was inappropriate, or it wasn't like, it didn't have to be necessarily inappropriate, just not maybe germane to your line of business necessarily the types of questions you're expecting these models to ask. And then also thinking about cost, right? Is a simple question, can it go to a smaller model? If it's a more complicated question, it might go to your biggest and most powerful model. So thinking around optimizing these systems for not wasting responses, right? And things that you're not maybe relevant and not something you want to have to pay for, from the model costs, but also optimizing, within valid responses, the right place to go for the models based on the complexity of the inquiry.
All right, we are really close to time, but I have to ask you each, what are you most looking forward to? There's so much change, but what are you most looking forward to in the short term, maybe let's call it this year or early next, when it comes to AI?
I think I'm most looking forward to expanded total layperson or Luddite adoption of agentic technology. I use this stuff every day. I've used it every day for the last couple of years. Like, I know the benefit very well that it brings to me. It's integrated into my daily workflows. I could probably go back to not using it, but I'm not going to be pleased about it. I'm not going to be as efficient. But I'm very comfortable with it. But I see so many people who could get such incredible benefit from it that don't, because they haven't taken the time to play with it and fail, or they haven't had someone say, hey, let me take 5 minutes and show you how this is going to change the mundane stuff that you do every day. And I think as it becomes more accessible, as it becomes cheaper, faster, more accurate, I'm super excited to see just the general proliferation of the incredible power and benefit that generative AI can bring to everyone.
Super. Emily, what are you looking forward to?
Yeah. I love that. My 7-year-old's mother has a tile company, and she's been using generative AI to create new pictures of different tile colors, basically.
Wow.
They don't have any installation pictures yet because they're new. And so, again, bringing it into places like, my mom could barely use Facebook 10 years ago, right? So this is really, really amazing impact. I guess maybe I'll take a little bit of, a different angle. We didn't talk a lot, of course, about agents, although it was covered very well in some of the other presentations. Amazing, amazing power out there. I think one of the areas that I'm most excited about is in the area of drug discovery. And so, Loca's been doing a lot of work with companies that are in the R&D stages of pharmaceuticals or sort of adjacent things. We've also been doing this for genomic research with plants, for instance, so soybean genomes, and trying to produce more food, by using these genomic models. But what we were able to do with, these DNA and protein language models that have been trained on entire human and primate genomes is retrain them on cancer genomes, and actually be able to start finding targets with a much, much higher percentage of accuracy. So just I think, maybe 2 weeks ago, one of the research paper was presented at the American Association of Cancer Research that we did with our partner Nurix, around using these models to be able to cure rare leukemias. And they're seeing sort of an 80% improvement in a lot of the efficiency of the models, targets that are being identified by these models. And so very, very exciting. Yeah.
That is exciting. Everyone, if you would, please give a warm round of applause to our guests.